Hi, Chris.
Hey, Kyle.
How are you,
How are
sir?
you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thanks very much.
I'll start with the compliments. Bide My Time is a really fantastic record, man. You've outdone yourself.
Oh, well, Kyle, it's Tom Petty was an outstanding producer, and he got it out of me and guided me through the whole process. I mean, it's fantastic. And thank you for the compliment. I'm very happy with it. And so I probably the last conversation I had with Tom, I said, well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate this album and how it's such a great last record in my career. And he says, what are you talking about? We're not done yet. I've got other plans for you.
Oh.
And so there it is. But yeah, thank you.
What a thing to say and to leave you on. I mean, that, on one side, that's got to be such a vote of confidence right there, sort of a supercharge. I mean, how does that line leave you at this point?
Well, I'm very sad still that he left us so soon. And while I was working with him, which was last January into early February, he was fine. Nobody had any inkling of him having any issues with his heart and things. He had a knee that he needed to get fixed, but he was great. He was there every day on time in the studio. And Kyle, he would bring in coffee every morning. Not somebody who worked for him. He'd bring in a tray of coffee to everybody, and it speaks exactly of who this man was. He was so humble, and it was hard. And I've sort of known him since 1978, but really got to know him in the first 2 months of the year. And he's one of the most humble human beings. And it's hard for me I never could look at him as a rock star, and he is. He was such a huge force in music around the world. Huh? Yeah, it leaves me a little sad, but it was really tough while we were on the road when that happened. That was tough for everybody in the world. I think Tom, he really reached out to everyone. Everybody could identify with Tom Petty. He was like every man,
Yeah.
That's the beautiful part of it.
Yeah, they became America's band. That's what I've been saying. That's the one we all could agree on. Whatever was going on politically, we had the Heartbreakers.
That's right. And he was the guy. He was the last rock star. I hate to say it like that, but he was, and he was just such a great musician. But we know that. Yeah, he was. He was America's band. It's perfect.
Well, with every bit of the respect to Tom, and I know we'll be talking about him off and on through this because you sort of have to. I don't want that to detract from this great record, because, but with that, I guess, I mean, he does play the beginning of it, right? Because I think I'd read that you had sort of just kind of gave up on becoming a recording artist, like you weren't going to do any more records. Is that how the story goes?
Yeah, I felt that I didn't really have any intention of recording again. I said, well, I had a great time. 5 decades. I had a great career, and I did everything I ever wanted to do, and then some. And then this sort of just fell in my lap, and I'll never forget. You might have read this where I said, I told Herb Peterson, I said, I better call Tom on this. I said, are you sure you want to do this? He said, well, do you want me to? I said, but can you make the commitment? He said, well, do you want me to do this? I said, I'd be thrilled to work with you. He said, well, let's do it. And there it was. And the funny line, and you probably read this one, but I said, you haven't even heard any of my songs. He said, I'm not worried. I said, but I'm worried. I don't know if they're right. He said, and I'll tell you if they don't. If I don't hear them, I'll tell you, and we'll work on it, or we'll go to get another song or something, which once again speaks volumes of the man and his skill at producing records, as evidenced by all the great Heartbreaker records that came out.
And it's an interesting combination, the two of you, because Petty was so influenced by the Byrds. He talked about that a lot for a long time. And I sort of wonder, for him, this was probably even a bit of a geek dream, a nerd dream, rock and roll nerds, getting to do what they want to do finally. I mean, was there any sense of him wanting to find that classic sound and to retrace your steps in that way?
No, he didn't really ever come out with that. I sort of said, I want to cut the Gene Clark song, Gene, the original member of the Byrds, and Tom knew the song, and he knew exactly what it was, and that sounds so much like the Byrds as I wanted it to be. And but he is ever such subtle, inspiring things he would say or do in the studio. He got it out of me. He really got the performance, and he was encouraging. And there actually was one song, Kyle, that I thought we should cut, and he said, I don't hear that. And he says, why don't you work on it and come back? Let's hear it tomorrow. And I played it again the next day. And before he said anything, I said, you know what? I don't think it's right either. And then he said, have you ever cut this? I said, yeah. He said, well, why are we recording it again? So that was the only time. It was a joy. Every day in the studio with him and with the other guys, the Heartbreakers, was a joy. Just a blessing for me.
Well, as a fan, it is really fun to hear some of those little moments when you can kind of, pinpoint eras. I think there's been reviewers that says this is really an album that, by purpose or not, sort of summarizes all of your strengths throughout your entire career. And like when I hear She Don't Care About Time, I mean, the opening of that, I'm transformed suddenly, even though I've never heard this song. And I think that's one of the great characteristics about a great song right there. And that's what I mean. Those songs right there, was there ever that sense when you started those, or okay, this is going to be sort of, Burritos, this is going to be sort of Byrds, or does that just come out of you naturally like that?
I just followed my instincts on it. I finally, at the end of the record, Kyle, I said, this is almost like a concept, like you just said. I mean, there's some bluegrass type things that I did way back when I started playing in 1963, 64, and then there's Byrds stuff, and the Flying Burrito Brothers. Yeah, there is one song. Biding My Time actually reminds me of the Burrito Brothers in a certain way, but it did take on that air of a 50-year history of my music and all that, and we just. And as you may know, Walk Right Back was an accident that wasn't even planned to be on the record, that Everly Brothers sung, and Tom just heard us singing it in the studio, and he stopped everything, and we recorded it right there. He said, we got to put this on the album. He was absolutely right. It fit perfect.
And then to have something like Here She Comes Again, that one was never recorded, right?
And it sounds so early Byrds, 1965, first album or second album. And Roger McGuinn and I wrote that in 1979, and we played it once or twice live in McGuinn, Clark, and Hillman when we were going out with Gene Clark, and never cut it. And all I had to go on was a live performance that someone taped. But I felt like someday I want to record this. It just has that. I love it. I love the hook to it. And Roger was always a joy to work with. He was always fun to be in the studio with or on stage. He was great, professional.
Yeah. Now, at what point had you decided, at what point in all this process did you say, let's invite McGuinn and Cross in here to be on the songs as well?
Well, I wanted to do Bells of Rimney, but I only if David was able to had the time to sing on it, because I felt David and Herb together. Herb's another incredible tenor singer. In fact, David looks up to Herb in certain ways. And I wanted to sing that song with both of those guys, which we got to do. David was a champ, came down and spent an hour or two getting his part right on it. And Here She Comes Again, we had to have Roger on it because he was a co-writer, and it was right up his alley. We tried to have him in the studio with us, but he was busy, and he was back in Florida, so we sent him the files, and he overdubbed back there. But he did great, so. Yeah. And he's happy with it, so that's all that counts,
I mean, there's so much history with all of you guys, even if you're not in the same room, just to have those voices, musicians blending at the same time. I started thinking about, the careers you've had, and everybody's well grown up and moved around and had a lot of lives in between. And for the history books and the way, so I'm 36, and, the way I look at all of rock and roll, do you still feel like you're part of a generation and part of this, what I look at as a really important club within music?
I do feel that. I felt that the early to late 60s was incredible musically. I never ever, I'll hear a Beatles song on the radio from that period, early Beatles through, let's say, 67, Revolver, the album Revolver, and I never stop. I just love it. It still hits a nerve, and that period of time from when the Byrds started in late 64 through to 1967, 68 was magical. I mean, for not only the Byrds or the Beatles or the Rolling Stones, everybody, and it was such a new sound in a way, and also the record companies were just starting to see that, and they were really functioning as creative entities. They would sign you if you got signed to the label. They would stick with you through a couple of albums. It wasn't like you better sell platinum or you're off the label. They stuck with you and nurtured you, and you're developing your sound. But yes, I do feel like I was part of a great club. I was a very lucky guy.
Yeah.
And you know that story. I get the call, can you play bass? Sure. I couldn't play bass. I didn't have a clue, you know. And it took me I'm probably by the second album I was figuring it out, but I was sort of basing it on bluegrass rhythm guitar. It's totally interesting. But the Byrds, what made the Byrds unique was that we didn't really know what we were doing. We just plugged in and went for it, you know, and that was the magic, yeah.
It's sort of what makes the title a little bit funny, you know, saying all that, because "Biding My Time" is an interesting thing to say after, you know, 50 plus years.
And that song was written in 1987, and we were going to record it in the Desert Rose Band, and it just didn't. It fell through the cracks. Better that it's recorded now at the age I am, and after all, more years have passed. And it's interesting how people look at the meaning of "Biding My Time." I said, well, it's sort of like you're waiting. I don't know what you're waiting for, but it came out pretty well. I'm happy with that one. Never analyze your own music is my motto. Somebody will come up to me and say, I know what you meant on that song, and then they'll say something. I'm going, that's not exactly what I meant at all, but that's okay. You get some pleasure out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right.
I know we can't get out of here, of course, without talking about you also covering Wildflowers, one of Petty's greatest songs that kind of closes out the whole record. And, you know, I'm sure that takes on a completely different meaning for you now as it does for a lot of us, but I kind of wondered, like, while you were doing it, is there any sense of, like, just don't screw this up because you're recording the song in front of the dude that wrote it?
No, I didn't ever feel that, and I wasn't even aware of that song. And it wasn't until Tom invited Herb and I to sing on the Music Cares banquet that he was being honored for. We were one of many acts that he asked to perform, and Herb brought Wildflowers. He said, I think this is the song we can do, really fits us, what we do. And I'd never heard it before. And then I said, we start working it up. I said, this is a great song. We need to record this. And I asked Tom's permission. I said, do you mind if we record Wildflowers? He said, no, I'd be honored. So I didn't really think about it. We just went out and sang it, you know. But as far as now, after we've lost the poor Tom, I mean, it takes on a different meaning, especially the last verse, you know. Mm-hmm. You belong free of all trouble, and you belong in that home by and by and all this. And it's sort of semi-autobiographical, I think, his song. Wow, it's a beautiful song, absolutely beautiful. And once again, Kyle, it just went on at the end of the record. We're putting the sequence together, and we said, let's close it with Wildflowers, and let's do this. And unbeknownst to any of us, what would transpire in the next 10 months, you know. Yeah. So it just was one of those perfect moments where everything fit together. And when I doubt if I could ever replicate anything on that level again, you know. He was a joy. And I will say this without getting in trouble with David Crosby or Roger McGuinn. If anybody could have put the Byrds back together for one album, it would have been Tom Petty, because he knew all of us really well. Yeah. That remains to be seen. So.
Well, if it ever needs to happen, at least you know that you've got Tom Petty in your corner.
I got and the Heartbreakers too. So
that's right.
But anyway.
And you've written a book, is that right?
Well, I have. I've got a manuscript. I obviously have to rewrite the epilogue, the end of the book. I have to rewrite that, which I'm going to tackle in January after the holidays and start really go through it again and redo the end of it, and then I'll shop it. And there's one fella that's interested in representing the book, and we'll see what happens, you know. But I'll spend some time finishing that up, yeah. And most of that, Kyle, is about me growing up in a small town in California in 1950s, and then being swept into music, and really starting with folk music and bluegrass, and then, like everybody else my age, the Beatles are on Ed Sullivan in February of '64, and it just, boy, that touched a nerve with everybody. So right. I remembered all the stories, and they're all nice. I don't put down anything that denigrates anybody I work with. I mean, I have only the good memories of people I worked with, and I had some interesting friends. Still do. The ones that are still with us, I have still close relationships with.
Well, Chris, I can say that, you know, thank God to Tom Petty for having you do this record, and now that he's gone, you know, if it takes someone else to pull you to do it again, I really hope it does happen, because I really enjoy this. But I'll say, if you just decide never to record again, for whatever reason, this is an amazing close to that chapter, either way. So
You're very kind. I appreciate that, Kyle.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
No problem, Chris.
Yeah, and thank you for all your support and everything you guys do at WSPK.
All right, Chris.
So
Thank
thanks
you so
very much. I appreciate you talking to me. Yeah, have a great Thanksgiving, my favorite holiday, the greatest.
All right, you too.
And have a great Thanksgiving, a good Christmas and New Year. And hopefully I'll see you down in Louisville at some point.
All right, come on down. Take care.
All right, buddy. All right, buddy.
All right,
Thank you very much. See ya.